I had been gone only 3 days. 3 days in a regional meeting that left me exhausted but proud. Our numbers were better than projected, every deadline had been met, and against the odds, I had secured a slice of budget for training. It should have been one of those Mondays when you walk into the office lighter than air, when you can look at your people and say we did it. But the moment the elevator doors slid open, that lightness drained away. Silence. Not the quiet hum of concentration. Not the pre-coffee lull. Silence, the kind that swallows footsteps and turns familiar hallways into unfamiliar territory. Mondays in our department were never like this. There was always something, Ren dropping her backpack too loudly, Kyrie muttering about test cases under his breath, Finola already arguing with someone over syntax before 8:30 in the morning. I stepped out into a corridor that felt abandoned. My first thought was that maybe there had been an emergency drill. My second was that I had misread my calendar and arrived on a public holiday. Neither was true. The rest of the building buzzed as usual. Phones rang in accounting. Someone laughed in HR. But in our wing, the one we had earned after 3 consecutive miracle projects, there was nothing. I walked faster, heels clicking sharp against the floor. My chest tightened as I rounded the corner. Gone. Desks stripped bare, monitors removed, chairs rolled away. Even the small potted plants, those stubborn little survivors we had raised from cuttings and nursed through long nights, vanished. Only faint outlines of dust on the carpet showed where they had been. Finola, my voice bounced back at me. She was always first in, always. She once joked she wanted to beat the cleaning crew just to prove she could. No answer. The emptiness pressed in around me. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own department. That was when I saw Loxley from accounting. He froze the moment our eyes met, the way people do when they know something you don't. His expression shifted into something uncomfortably close to pity. What happened to my team? My voice was sharper than I intended. He hesitated, looked around as if making sure no one else was listening. You should check the basement. They moved them yesterday. I stared at him. The basement? We didn't have office space in the basement. At least not the kind anyone would willingly work in. But his eyes told me it wasn't a joke. The elevator ride down felt eternal. Each passing floor increased the weight pressing on my ribs. When the doors opened, the air hit me first, damp, metallic, laced with something sour that clung to the back of my throat. This wasn't office air. This was storage air, forgotten air. I followed the sound of faint voices, weaving past crates of old equipment and stacks of paper boxes yellowing at the edges. Finally, a flimsy sheet of paper taped crookedly to a door. Engineering Team B. The sign was printed in a hurry, ink-streaked, corners curling. My heart thudded once hard. I pushed the door open. There they were. 7 people crammed into a room that looked more like a maintenance closet than an office. Exposed pipes snaked across the ceiling. A bucket sat beneath one of them, catching rhythmic drops of water. Cables sprawled across the concrete floor like vines, plugged into too few outlets. Folding tables held their monitors, screens tilted at awkward angles. They all looked up when I entered. Vega, our hardware veteran, hunched forward with his broad hands resting on a keyboard too small for him. Dak sat silent, fingers twitching across the keys, but eyes unfocused, as though even he could not process code in this place. Kyrie leaned against the wall with his notebook, glasses reflecting the sickly light of a bare bulb. Ren, the youngest, perched at a table's edge, jaw set tight to keep from saying what she wanted to say. Indra tapped irritably at a lagging security protocol. Nur stared at me as though trying to read my thoughts before I spoke. And Finola, proud Finola, sat rigid at her makeshift desk, her eyes flashing with humiliation. The sight almost broke me. What happened? I forced the words out. Finola's voice cut the air. While you were gone, Deer came with movers. Said we had to relocate immediately. 30 minutes to pack, that was it. Relocate, for what? Ren's laugh was bitter. For a specialist, some miracle worker. Deer says he'll revolutionize everything. The others looked back at me, waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. My chest burned, but outwardly I stayed calm. Calm is what had kept me alive through refugee camps and crisis zones. Calm is what had carried this team through impossible deadlines. I let my gaze travel slowly across their faces. These were not just employees. Each of them had been handpicked, not just for technical skill, but for resilience. I remembered the first time I had met Finola, rejected by 3 companies for being too blunt, yet brilliant enough to see order in chaos. I remembered persuading Vega to postpone retirement because I knew no one could match his hardware instincts. Ren, overlooked in campus fairs, yet with a natural genius for elegant solutions. Dax quiet but fluent in more languages, human and digital than most people ever learn. Kyrie, Indra, Nur, each of them carrying scars from being underestimated until I brought them together. Now here they were, treated like surplus furniture. Something inside me shifted. The outrage crystallized into something colder, steadier. "Pack your bags," I said. They blinked at me. Silence filled the room. "Not just for here," I added. "Everything, quietly. Take what you might want when you leave. Keep this between us." Confusion rippled across their faces. Vega frowned, Finola tilted her head as if to protest, Ren opened her mouth then closed it again. But none of them argued. They trusted me, even when they didn't understand. That trust was all I needed. At home that night, I couldn't shake the image of their faces in that basement room. Anger simmered beneath my calm. 32 years, Vega had muttered under his breath, 32 years, and this is how they treat me. He wasn't wrong. I poured myself a glass of water and stared out the window at the city lights. I thought about the irony. 8 years leading this team. 15 years before that in places these corporate executives could not imagine. Muddy camps, makeshift shelters, air thick with smoke and fear. I had coordinated supplies in the middle of civil wars, built networks where none existed, kept people alive on little more than grit. And here I was, back in a basement. Not because of bombs or storms. Because of a man with perfect hair and polished shoes who thought the future could be bought with buzzwords. Dear, he had been our department head for only 5 months, just long enough to prove he didn't care about track records. He wanted a golden ticket, a name he could parade in front of the board, and apparently he had found it. Bastion. The name alone sounded like a brand, not a person. The next morning, I went upstairs. Our old workspace, the bright corner between design and testing labs, was unrecognizable. Gone were the rows of desks, the organized chaos of whiteboards, the quiet hum of focused work. In its place was a single desk, large and gleaming. A young man stood there arranging framed certificates, degrees, awards, motivational slogans. He didn't even glance up at me. Deer hovered nearby, his face glowing like a man who believed he had struck gold. "Sophie," he said, too loudly, too cheerfully. "Perfect timing. Meet Bastion, our new productivity transformation specialist. His methods increased output 300% at his last 3 companies." I looked at Bastion. He kept arranging his frames as if I were invisible. Deer leaned closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your team can manage downstairs until the next budget review. Bastion needs this space to implement his vision." My throat tightened. My fists wanted to clench. Instead, I nodded once, said nothing, and walked back to the elevator. I didn't need to fight him here, not yet. The hum of machinery followed me as I descended to the basement. My team looked up when I returned. Their eyes searched mine, desperate. "It's fine," I told them. "Start archiving our projects, organize knowledge bases, document everything, thoroughly." Dax's voice was barely audible. "Why? They don't care about our work." "Because everything we do should be done with integrity," I answered, loud enough for all of them to hear. "No matter where we do it." They exchanged glances, uncertain but obedient, and I smiled just slightly, because they didn't know it yet, but I was already moving pieces into place. The plan had begun. The basement had its own rhythm. A kind of slow, oppressive heartbeat that came from the machinery hidden in the walls. You could feel it in your bones after a few hours. The hum of pipes, the thrum of ventilation, the occasional plink of water into the bucket beside Finola's desk. By the end of that first week, we were already adapting in the way humans always do when forced underground. Ren had pinned up sticky notes in neon colors to fight the grayness. Nur dragged in a desk lamp from home to soften the harsh fluorescent glare. Vega had taped a comic strip to the wall. Little rebellions, but I could see the weight pressing on them. Kyrie's headaches grew worse under the bad lighting. Dax typed with the jittery restlessness of someone whose focus had been broken. Finola's sarcasm, usually sharp and funny, turned brittle. Even Vega, who had always been the anchor, muttered under his breath about early retirement. I kept my voice steady whenever I spoke to them. "We'll get through this," I said more than once, but I didn't tell them how. Not yet, because the truth was the how depended on timing, and timing depended on Deer. Deer came down on the second Friday. He entered like a man descending into his wine cellar, nose wrinkled at the damp air. His suit looked too clean for this place. He forced a smile, the kind that twitched at the edges. "How are we all settling in?" he asked, as if we were guests in a hotel. No one answered. His gaze darted toward me, then back to the group. "Good news," he announced. "We're considering moving you back upstairs. East Wing. Slightly smaller, but better than this. Just until Bastion finalizes his systems." I could feel my team tense, waiting for me to reject it outright, but I didn't. Thank you for recognizing our value, I said calmly. Confusion flickered across Finola's face. Ren frowned. Vega's jaw tightened. They didn't understand, but they trusted me enough not to question it in front of him. Deer left satisfied, humming as he climbed the stairs. When the door closed, Ren snapped. What was that? You thanked him? I kept my tone even. Sometimes survival means smiling at the hand that feeds you, for now. It wasn't the answer they wanted, but it was the one they needed. That night, I stayed late after everyone else had gone. The basement was quieter when empty, but somehow lonelier. I opened the old laptop I kept separate from company systems and began typing. Not code, not reports, notes, timelines, contacts, pieces of a puzzle only I could see. I had started this file months ago, the day Deer first walked into our department with his glossy smile and speeches about fresh perspectives. I knew then he would never value us for what we were. People like him didn't. They valued flash, shiny toys. I had seen it in refugee camps too, aid directors chasing projects that looked good in photos while ignoring the logistics that kept people alive. So I prepared. Quietly. Patiently. Now, in this basement, the file grew thicker. Documentation of every project we completed, every dismissal Deer had thrown our way, every credit Bastion had claimed without proof. My cursor blinked at the end of a sentence. I typed 2 words and then sat back, staring at them. Insurance policy, because that was all this really was. Not revenge, not rebellion. Insurance. 3 days later, word spread through the grapevine. Bastion had presented to the board. I hadn't been invited, of course. Neither had my team. We learned about it from a designer who overheard the meeting. Total disaster, she whispered in the cafeteria. They asked him technical questions and he froze. Deer kept trying to cover, but it was obvious he had no clue. The rumor reached the basement before lunch was over. Spirits lifted instantly. Does this mean we're back upstairs? Ren asked, eyes bright. Maybe he's finished, Vega muttered, almost hopeful. I didn't answer, because I knew Deer. Failure wouldn't scare him off. It would only make him dig deeper. Men like him couldn't admit mistakes. Sure enough, that afternoon Deer appeared at our door again, all smiles. Good news, he said, as if the last disaster hadn't happened. We're finalizing plans for your return to the East Wing. Bastion just needs a little more time. My team looked at me. Excellent, I said smoothly. Thank you for keeping us updated. And again, confusion clouded their faces, but I smiled, calm, controlled. Because every time Deer underestimated us, every time he dismissed us, he gave me more rope. Rope I intended to pull tight at the right moment. Weeks blurred together. The basement became routine. My team documented everything. They grumbled, they sighed, but they followed my instructions. Dax whispered one afternoon, "Why are we doing this so carefully? They don't care." I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Because what we do defines us, not them. We work with integrity, always. Silence followed, then Kyrie nodded slowly. Vega cracked a faint smile. Even Ren, restless and young, set her jaw with determination. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about preparing. They didn't know it, but the plan was already in motion. And when it unfolded, no one, not Deer, not Bastion, not even the board, would see it coming. The first time I stood face to face with Bastion, I realized exactly why Deer had fallen for him. It wasn't the certificates, though he had enough of them to wallpaper a room. It wasn't the polished shoes or the designer watch. It was the way he radiated certainty. He looked like the kind of man executives wanted to believe in, young enough to represent the future, confident enough to silence doubts, polished enough to impress without saying a single meaningful thing. I found him in what used to be my team's space. Our bright, airy corner between the design lab and testing wing had been stripped bare, turned into a throne room for one. He stood there adjusting frames on my old desk, not even glancing up as I walked in. Deer hovered nearby as though waiting for applause. "Sophie," he said, far too loudly. "Perfect timing. Come, meet Bastion, our productivity transformation specialist. His approach boosted efficiency 300% at his last 3 companies. 300%. The number sounded rehearsed, like something plucked from a brochure. Bastion didn't even look up. He slid another certificate into place, aligning it perfectly with the others. "Your team can manage downstairs until the next budget review," Deer added. "Bastion needs this space to implement his vision." I let my gaze linger on the certificates. They gleamed under the fluorescent lights, polished and meaningless. "Of course," I said evenly. Deer beamed, mistaking my calm for compliance. But what I really saw wasn't a man of vision. It was a house of cards, standing only because no one had blown on it yet. That night in the basement, I told my team to keep archiving, documenting, preparing. Ren frowned. Why are we doing their work for them? Why are we making it easier for them to replace us? Because the way we leave matters as much as the fact that we leave, I said, and because integrity is our weapon. When this comes apart, and it will, our work will speak louder than their promises. Finola muttered something under her breath, but I caught the flicker of agreement in her eyes. Vega nodded once. Dax said nothing, but his fingers tapped a rhythm on the table that I recognized, the prelude to a breakthrough. They didn't see the picture yet, but they trusted me enough to follow. The tension grew in the following weeks. Bastian strutted around the upper floors like he owned them. Deer trailed him, nodding at every word. Whenever I passed them in the cafeteria, I caught fragments of phrases: disruptive innovation, exponential growth, revolutionary methodology. Buzzwords stacked like children's blocks, pretty until the first push. And the push was coming, because beneath the polished exterior, cracks were already showing. I knew it from the whispers that reached the basement. A testing team complaining that Bastian's new workflow made debugging twice as long. A designer rolling her eyes after sitting through a presentation that promised results without explaining process. Even accounting grumbled about sudden budget requests for visionary initiatives that had no receipts attached. The building itself seemed to know. Upstairs hummed with false enthusiasm, but down here in the basement, reality seeped through the cracks like water through the pipes. My team noticed. "This can't last," Vega said one afternoon, rubbing his temples. "We're the ones keeping the lights on." "Everyone knows it." "Do they?" Ren asked bitterly. "They will," I promised, and I meant it. The confrontation didn't come in a meeting room or a scheduled review. It came in the hallway late one evening when I was heading upstairs with a folder under my arm. Bastian turned the corner at the same time. He nearly collided with me. For the first time, he looked directly at me. "You're Sophie," he said flatly, as though confirming a rumor. "Yes. I've heard you're respected, reliable," he smirked. "But old systems can't survive forever. Innovation requires sacrifice." The words might have stung if I hadn't heard them before. They were the same lines every wide-eyed consultant had thrown at me in refugee camps when they wanted to test shiny software in places where people just needed clean water. "Sacrifice," I repeated softly. Interesting choice of word. He tilted his head, perhaps sensing the edge in my voice. "Don't take it personally. Change is always uncomfortable." Then he walked past me without another glance. I stood in the hallway, my grip tightening on the folder. Not anger, not yet, but a promise. That night I gathered the team. "They're underestimating us," I said simply. "That's our advantage." Finola raised an eyebrow. "You have something in mind." "I always do." For a moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the steady drip into the bucket. Then Ren smiled faintly. Vega leaned back, arms crossed but eyes softer. Even Dax glanced at me and gave a small nod. Trust. And with trust, a plan can become something more. The next week was a blur of contradictions. Upstairs, Bastian paraded his vision in glossy slide decks. Down here in the basement, my team quietly executed the real work that kept the company afloat. It was almost comical, the contrast. Bastian spoke of transformation, while we patched systems that would have collapsed without us. He promised 300% growth, while Vega soldered components by hand to meet a client's deadline. He declared innovation inevitable, while Finola debugged code at 2 in the morning to prevent a critical crash. The irony was thick enough to choke on, but Deer ate it up. He visited the basement less often now, but whenever he did, he carried the smug glow of a man who thought he was steering a ship to glory. He never stayed long, just enough to remind us that we were temporary tenants in the underworld. "Progress takes sacrifice," he told us one day, echoing Bastian's words without realizing it. "But don't worry, your role is still valuable. Support is important." Support. As if 32 years of Vega's expertise and a library of patents from our team amounted to little more than spare parts. I smiled at him then, because smiling was easier than showing my hand too soon. 2 days later, the board summoned Bastian for his first formal presentation. We weren't invited, of course. I only knew because Muir overheard executives whispering in the cafeteria. "Showcase of the future," they called it. We waited in the basement like prisoners awaiting a verdict. Hours passed. My team pretended to work, but every keystroke was sharper than usual. Finally, word trickled down. "He bombed," said a designer, poking her head in. They asked him to explain technical details and he froze. Total deer-in-the-headlights moment. No pun intended. Finola burst out laughing, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in weeks. Vega's shoulders shook silently. Even Ren allowed herself a grin, but I didn't laugh, because I knew Deer. A normal manager might have cut his losses. Deer was not normal. He had tied his reputation to Bastion, and men like him didn't retreat when cornered. They doubled down. Sure enough, the very next day Deer stormed into the basement, wearing a smile stretched too wide. "Good news," he announced. "We're finalizing your move back upstairs. East Wing, renovations almost complete." Hope flickered across Ren's face. She had been drafting a resignation letter just the day before. Kyrie leaned forward, alert. Even Vega lifted his head, but I watched Deer closely. His eyes didn't quite match his smile. He was nervous, desperate even. "Thank you for recognizing our value," I said smoothly. My team stared at me as though I'd lost my mind, but they didn't contradict me. When Deer left, slamming the door behind him, Ren rounded on me. "Why did you thank him? He's the reason we're here in the first place." I held her gaze. "Because sometimes you let people believe they're winning while you prepare the real strike. He thinks he's moving us back because it suits him. Let him. We'll use whatever he gives us." Finola's eyes narrowed. "You're planning something?" "Yes." "What?" I smiled faintly. "Trust me." That weekend, I invited an old colleague to tour the company, Talia. We had worked together years ago in a refugee camp on the edge of a war zone. She was sharper than anyone in this building, and unlike Deer, she had learned to value substance over style. As we walked through the corridors, I timed it perfectly. Deer and Bastion appeared ahead, showing potential clients around. Deer's smile widened when he spotted me. "Sophie." He called out too loud, too eager. "Perfect timing. Come meet Grayscale Solutions. They're interested in Bastion's productivity system." I introduced Talia, watching Bastion launch into his polished pitch. When he finished, she tilted her head. "Fascinating. And you've implemented this successfully elsewhere?" "Absolutely," Bastion said smoothly. 300% productivity increase at Northwest Technologies." Talia's expression cooled. "That's odd. I sit on the board at Northwest." "We never recorded such improvements. In fact, there were significant delays during your tenure." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Deer's face flushed crimson. Bastion stammered. The clients shifted uncomfortably. I let the moment hang just long enough. Then I dropped my line casually. "Talia's here because I've accepted her offer. My team will be establishing a new engineering division at her company next month." The shock in Deer's eyes was almost comical. Bastion's confident smile cracked for the first time. They sputtered, tried to argue, but the damage was done. That was when I knew for certain. The rope I'd been letting them weave around themselves was tightening, and they hadn't even realized yet that I was the one pulling it. The gossip after Bastion's client disaster was a storm, and storms in corporate hallways travel faster than truth. By Tuesday morning, every break room had its own version. Some swore he had forgotten his slides. Others said he froze when asked about metrics. One even claimed he spilled water on himself mid-sentence. Down in the basement, the story reached us like sunlight through a crack in the wall. My team sat up straighter. For the first time in weeks, there was laughter. "Maybe they'll finally see through him," Ren said, eyes bright. "Maybe we'll get our desks back." Even Vega allowed himself a chuckle, a sound I hadn't heard from him since before the move. But I didn't laugh, because storms are unpredictable. They destroy, yes, but they also clear skies. And sometimes they feed illusions instead of washing them away. I had been in too many crisis zones to mistake gossip for victory. "Don't celebrate yet," I told them. "This isn't over." They looked at me, confused. Hope is a dangerous drug, and I didn't want them overdosing on it too soon. 2 days later, the board convened behind glass doors on the top floor. Bastion was summoned again, Deer at his side. We weren't invited. We never were. But I had eyes and ears in places they didn't expect. At noon, the first whispers filtered down. It wasn't a firing, a designer muttered to me in the cafeteria. It was a coronation. Her words tightened something in my chest. Bastion had stumbled again, yes, but Deer had reframed it, not as a failure, but as proof. Proof that he was attempting something so bold, so revolutionary, that mistakes were inevitable. He painted Bastion not as a liability, but as a symbol. And the board had nodded. They liked symbols. That was when it hit me. This wasn't about performance. It was about optics. That night I sat alone in the basement after the others had gone. The drip of water into the bucket was maddeningly steady, a metronome of decay. I opened my laptop, scrolling through the file I had been building. Project metrics, budget reallocations, testimonies from colleagues upstairs, rumors of lawsuits from Bastion's past. But tonight I added something new, fragments of board minutes. I had called in a favor from an old contact, someone who still owed me from a supply run years ago in a refugee camp. The minutes weren't detailed, but they were revealing. Phrases jumped out at me: strategic disruption, bold leadership. Optics matter as much as deliverables. My lips pressed into a thin line. It was Bastion they were protecting. It was themselves. They had bet their reputations on him. If he failed, they failed too. Which meant they would defend him, polish him, prop him up, until the illusion either paid off or collapsed under its own weight. And illusions, I knew from experience, were often harder to kill than lies. The next morning, I gathered my team. "They're not letting him go," I said flatly. The words landed like a stone in water, rippling through the room. Ren's eyes widened. "But he's a fraud. Everyone saw it." "Doesn't matter," I replied. "The board isn't protecting him because he's good. They're protecting him because admitting he's bad would make them look worse." Vega swore softly, a word he rarely used. Finola leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, fury radiating from her every line. Dax shook his head and whispered in another language, one only he understood. "So what now?" Kyrie asked, his voice calm but tight. "Now," I said, "we prepare. They think we're invisible down here. That's our strength. While they're blinded by their illusions, we gather proof. When the time comes, we'll make sure reality speaks louder than their symbols." Finola leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "You've got something in mind." "Yes," I said simply. "What?" Ren pressed. I let a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. "A revelation." They exchanged looks, confused, skeptical, but trusting, always trusting. But as they turned back to their screens, I sat in silence, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't just about Deer's ego anymore. It wasn't just about Bastion's empty promises. Something bigger was moving behind those glass boardroom doors, and for the first time since this started, I wasn't sure if even my plan would be enough. The following week felt like walking through two different worlds. Upstairs, Bastion strutted from meeting to meeting like a minor celebrity. His voice carried down the hallways, words like synergy and scalability echoing off the glass walls. People clapped after his presentations, not because they understood, but because clapping was safer than silence. Deer hovered close behind, feeding off the reflected glow. Downstairs in the basement, reality lived. The pipes still dripped. The lights still flickered. We were still the ones debugging systems, patching vulnerabilities, delivering products. My team's work kept the company breathing while upstairs they played make-believe. The contrast was almost laughable if it hadn't been so dangerous. Because illusions can only stretch so far before they snap, and when they do, the recoil hits everyone. Late one evening, I lingered after the others left. I had been expecting it, but even so, the knock on the basement door startled me. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Sharp suit, sharper eyes. "You're Sophie Perry?" she asked. "Yes." She glanced over her shoulder before stepping inside. "I don't have long, I'm not supposed to be here." I stayed silent. Silence makes people talk. She lowered her voice. "Bastion isn't Deer's idea, he's a board plant." The words landed like ice water. "Explain," I said evenly. "There's a faction on the board," she continued. "They believe the company looks stagnant. They needed a symbol of disruption, something shiny to wave in front of investors. Bastion is that symbol. Deer was the perfect fool, ambitious enough to embrace him without asking questions. But make no mistake, this comes from higher up. Deer's just a pawn." I studied her face, the tightness in her jaw, the flicker in her eyes. She wasn't lying. "Why tell me this?" "Because not everyone agrees. Some of us still value results. But politics," she trailed off, shaking her head. "You should know what you're up against." Then she was gone, heels clicking briskly down the corridor. I sat in the basement, the echo of her words still ringing in my ears. The next morning, my team found me already there. "You're early," Finola muttered, setting down her bag. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. They all looked at me, waiting. I took a breath. "Listen carefully. Bastion isn't just Deer's pet project. He's backed by part of the board. They're using him to sell an illusion of change." Shock rippled through the room. "You mean this was planned?" Vega asked, voice low. "Planned," I confirmed. "And protected, which means exposing him won't be enough. We'll have to expose the ones behind him too." For a long moment, silence filled the basement. Even the pipes seemed to pause. Finally, Ren whispered, "So we're fighting the board?" I met her eyes. "We're fighting for the truth. And yes, that means the board too." Their faces shifted, fear, disbelief, then something harder, determination. They had been shoved into a basement, stripped of dignity, dismissed as expendable. Now they understood why. And nothing fuels loyalty like shared injustice. That evening, I updated my file. It was no longer just an insurance policy. It was a weapon. I added a new heading, the illusion machine. Under it, I listed names. Not just Bastion, not just Deer. Board members who had nodded in meetings, who had backed the narrative, who had something to gain if Bastion's revolution succeeded. Patterns emerged: investment ties, PR campaigns, quiet reshuffling of budgets. It wasn't just one man, it was a network, and if they thought my team was invisible, then invisibility would be our weapon. When I finally closed the laptop, I leaned back and let the hum of the basement fill the silence. This was bigger than I had planned for, bigger than I had warned my team about, but something inside me felt steady, almost familiar, because I had seen this before, not in boardrooms but in crisis zones, leaders who propped up illusions while people starved, men who believed appearances were more important than survival, and I knew how illusions ended. They collapsed. The only question was whether you collapsed with them or walked away stronger. I intended to walk away. And when I did, I wouldn't be walking alone. When you live underground long enough, the world above starts to feel like rumor. The basement had its own weather: the metallic tang of damp air, the uneven rhythm of water dripping into the bucket, the low thrum of machines buried deeper than we were. Fluorescent lights flickered like artificial sunrises, turning fatigue into a permanent state of being. Time didn't flow here. It dripped like the pipes. And yet, somehow, we began to build a life inside it. The first mornings were the hardest. My team arrived one by one, eyes heavy, shoulders tight. They would pause at the doorway as if expecting it to look different, as if yesterday's exile had been a bad dream. Then they would sigh and sit at their makeshift desks. I learned quickly that the way I carried myself set the tone. If I looked broken, they would break. If I looked steady, they would find steadiness too. So I arrived early. Every day. I emptied the bucket, wiped down the tables, adjusted the lamp Muir had brought to cut the glare. By the time they walked in, I was already working, calm, collected, as if this basement was just another office. The truth was, it wasn't calm inside me, but leaders don't get the luxury of showing cracks. What surprised me most was how quickly they adapted. Finola, who had always hidden her care behind sarcasm, began teaching Ren tricks of the trade. I would hear them muttering over the same screen, Finola's voice sharp, Ren's determined, both of them laughing in between like sisters. Dax, who rarely spoke, started communicating in scraps of paper. A snippet of code dropped on Kyrie's desk that fixed a problem she'd been chewing on for hours. A diagram left by the coffee pot that made Vega grunt in reluctant approval. Once, he left a crude cartoon of deer on my chair, chin jutting, grin too wide, that made me laugh until my eyes stung. Ren covered the walls with neon sticky notes, reminders, jokes, small victories. By the end of the first month, the gray concrete glowed with color, like we were reclaiming the space inch by inch. Vega brought in a battered speaker. The sound of quiet jazz filled the air, mingling with the pipes and hum of machines. It didn't erase the basement's misery, but it gave it rhythm. We were no longer just surviving. We were shaping our exile into something that belonged to us, but survival wasn't enough. The upstairs world was louder than ever. Bastion's name appeared in newsletters, in Deer's endless speeches, in the glossy brochures left in break rooms. They called him our visionary. They quoted him like scripture, but if you listened carefully, the cracks were already there. A testing team whispered about a new system that doubled their workload. A designer rolled her eyes after sitting through yet another slide deck filled with buzzwords but no process. Accounting grumbled about budget requests that came with no receipts. Small things, nothing that could topple an illusion on its own, but I collected them all, every complaint, every overrun, every missed deadline. My laptop became an archive of reality. One evening, after the others had gone, Vega stayed behind. He sat with his massive hands folded, staring at the pipes. "You've been quiet," I said. He shrugged. 30 years I've given this place. Thought I'd seen every kind of stupidity. But this is new. Do you regret staying? I asked. He considered. Regret? No. Anger? Yes, but I'm too stubborn to let them win. Retiring now would feel like surrender. I smiled faintly. Good. Stubbornness is survival. He chuckled. You're planning something, Sophie. I can see it in your eyes. Maybe, I said. He didn't press, because he didn't need to. A week later, Talia reappeared. She slid into the cafeteria seat across from me, crisp suit, sharper eyes, carrying herself like someone who didn't have to ask permission to be anywhere. You're wasting your time, she said without preamble. Good to see you too, I answered dryly. I'm serious. I've seen the reports. I know Bastion is a fraud, and I know the board is protecting him. Why fight a battle you can't win? Come with me, bring your team. I'll give you what this place never will: space, resources, respect. No basements. Her words cut because part of me wanted to believe her. But I thought of Finola's sticky notes, Ren's stubborn focus, Dax's silent gifts, Vega's quiet loyalty. They weren't ready to walk away, and neither was I can't, I said softly. Her eyes narrowed. Why, what are you waiting for? The right moment, I replied. She leaned back, frustrated. Be careful, Sophie. Illusions fight hardest when they're about to break. Then she was gone again, leaving the weight of her warning heavy in my chest. That night, I stayed in the basement long after the others had left. The jazz speaker silent, the sticky notes shadows of themselves in the dim light. I scrolled through my growing file of evidence, complaints, budget leaks, project slips, names. The pattern was forming clearer. This wasn't just about Bastion. It wasn't just about Deer. It was about the machine behind them, the illusion machine, and if we were going to fight it, we would need more than truth. We would need strategy. The basement changed us in ways I hadn't predicted. What began as exile slowly turned into a kind of quiet rebellion. Every sticky note Ren pinned to the wall, every jazz note Vega played, every crude cartoon Dax left on my desk was a refusal. We were still here. We still mattered. We would not be erased. But rebellion without direction is just noise. I needed to know who was truly with me, so I began to test them. Small things at first. I asked Kyrie to recompile archived data in 2 different ways, one version for the official files, another for me. She hesitated only once before nodding, and the next day she handed me both sets neatly labeled. I asked Nur to start logging minor budget discrepancies that no one else cared about. She did it with frightening efficiency, her charts so clear even an intern could see where the numbers didn't add up. I asked Dax to write code that would run invisible in the system, quietly recording changes to project files. He didn't ask why. The next morning the code was waiting on my desk, along with a doodle of a mouse gnawing through wires. Each small task was a step in the same direction, proof that when the moment came, they would follow. They didn't see the full picture yet, but they didn't need to. Bastion, meanwhile, was spiraling. The louder his failures grew, the more desperate his presentations became. He spoke faster, gestured wider, promised more outrageous numbers. It was like watching a magician pull rabbits from a hat long after the audience had noticed the trick. The real blow came during negotiations with a long-term client. Bastion had promised them a new system that would triple their efficiency. When the demo failed spectacularly, the client threatened to walk. For 3 tense days, it looked like we might lose one of the company's oldest contracts. In any rational world, that would have been the end of him, but this was not a rational world. The board stepped in. They reassured the client personally, blamed the hiccup on implementation delays, and doubled the discount to keep them. Bastion was shielded once again, his blunder reframed as part of a bold experimental process. My team seethed when they heard. Finola slammed her chair back so hard it skidded across the concrete. How many times can he fail before someone admits it? As many times as they need him to succeed, I answered quietly. They all stared at me, anger in their eyes, but also something else. Fear, because if the board could protect Bastion from losing a major client, then he wasn't just a fraud with good luck. He was untouchable. That night, I stayed late again. I studied the patterns in my file, the way numbers shifted after each board meeting, the way Bastion's failures were immediately covered by strategic distractions. It was too consistent, too clean. Someone was pulling strings. I thought of the woman who had warned me, the one who slipped into the basement to tell me Bastion was a board plant. Her words haunted me now. He was Deer's idea. He was a symbol chosen by people higher up. And if that was true, then Deer wasn't the real problem. He was just a fool dancing on strings. The real battle was with the board itself. The next morning, I found signs that we were no longer invisible. A new camera had been installed in the hallway leading to the basement. The excuse was security upgrades, but it was the first time in 8 years that anyone had cared about monitoring this floor. Later that afternoon, an unfamiliar man appeared in our workspace. He claimed to be from facilities, checking the wiring. But his questions weren't about pipes. They were about us. How many hours did we spend here? What were we working on? Did we interact much with other teams? I smiled, answered politely, and watched his eyes. He wasn't checking wiring. He was checking loyalty. When he left, I called my team together. They're watching us now, I said. Ren frowned. Why, we're in a basement. We're not even visible. Exactly, I replied. And that makes them nervous. They don't know what we're doing down here. They don't like what they can't control. For a long moment, silence pressed down on the room. Then Finola muttered, "Good. Let them be nervous." Her words sparked something in the others. Nods, determined faces. Yes, we were in the dark, but we weren't powerless. And if they wanted to watch us, they would eventually see exactly what we wanted them to see. That night, I opened my file once more. I added a new entry at the top. Operation Illusion. Because that was what this had become. not just a fight against one fraud, but against the entire illusion machine holding him up. And the longer they underestimated us, the sharper our strike would be when the time came. I closed the laptop, sat back in the dim hum of the basement, and let myself breathe. We were still underground, still in exile, still in the dark, but the dark is where revolutions are born. By the time autumn rolled in, the basement no longer felt like exile. It felt like a war room. The walls were covered now, not just with Ren's sticky notes, but with charts, diagrams, timelines. Kyrie had mapped out every project Bastion touched, marking failures in red, partial successes in yellow. Near-tracked budgets with a ruthlessness that would make an auditor sweat. Dax's invisible scripts were running constantly, logging every file change upstairs and storing copies on an encrypted drive he kept hidden in his backpack. Even Finola, who had once muttered about quitting, seemed to carry herself differently. Her sarcasm hadn't softened, but now it had direction. Whenever Bastion's name came up in a memo, she wrote his initials in the corner of her notebook and circled them with a jagged black line, like a hunter tallying prey. The basement had become our battlefield. Upstairs, the illusion grew louder, brighter, more desperate. Bastion's face appeared on the company's internal newsletter, smiling with the confidence of someone who had never failed in his life. Deere gave speeches in the atrium, promising a new era of productivity. The board approved glossy posters with slogans like innovation without limits. But the cracks were spreading faster now. A missed deadline here, a disgruntled partner there. A junior accountant accidentally forwarded me an email chain about unexplained reallocations in the budget. A designer confessed in hushed tones that she hadn't been able to finish a project because Bastion had changed the process 3 times in 1 week. Every slip fed our archive. Every slip fed the fire. I began small. Quiet tests. One evening, I misplaced a report in the shared drive. Not a fake report, but one of Kyrie's meticulously compiled charts showing how Bastion's changes had slowed production rather than speeding it. Within 24 hours, it spread through 3 departments. Within 48, someone forwarded it to Deere. The next morning, he stormed into the basement, face red, voice sharp. "Who uploaded this?" he demanded, waving a printed copy. My team stared at him in silence. I looked up calmly. "What is it?" "You know very well," he snapped. "This nonsense undermines everything we're building." "Strange," I said, tilting my head. "Those are official numbers. If they're nonsense, perhaps you should check with accounting." For a moment he sputtered, caught between fury and fear. Then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the bucket rattled. When he was gone, Finola let out a low whistle. That was risky. Yes, I agreed. And necessary. Because now we knew. The system upstairs was fragile enough that one truth, slipped into the open, could shake it. But small fires can spread. And once they spread, they're hard to contain. 2 weeks later, I saw the first real sign of panic. Bastion had been scheduled to lead a quarterly review. Instead, Deere presented in his place, rattling off numbers that didn't add up. The board members nodded politely, but I saw the tightness in their jaws. Something was shifting. That evening, I returned to the basement with news. "They're nervous," I told my team. "They may not admit it, but they are." Ren's eyes lit up. "Does that mean we've won?" I shook my head. "No, it means they'll fight harder." And I was right. The next morning, a new policy was announced. All data would now flow through a central innovation office for consistency. In practice, it meant every chart, every report, every number was filtered through Bastion's team before reaching anyone else. They were closing ranks. Finola cursed under her breath. Vega's fists clenched, but I only smiled. Because when people build walls, it's not a sign of strength. It's a sign of fear. The illusion upstairs was beginning to wobble, and people could feel it. In the cafeteria, I overheard snippets that carried the sharp edge of doubt. "Did you see the numbers in that report? They don't match last quarter." Bastion says the delays are part of the model, but since when is failing on schedule progress? Even the designers, usually too cautious to risk gossip, exchanged looks when his name came up. Cracks spread fastest in silence, and the silence upstairs was growing louder by the day. I chose my next move carefully. Too much too soon would expose us. Too little and the illusion would recover. This time, I asked Ren to upload a document, not to the shared drive, but to a channel used by project managers across departments. It was simple, a comparison of timelines before and after Bastion's, revolutionary changes. The numbers were undeniable. Projects had slowed. Budgets had bloated. Productivity had dropped. Ren hesitated. "If they trace this back, they won't," I said. "And if they do, it won't matter. The truth is harder to punish than a rumor." She nodded, biting her lip, and pressed send. By the end of the day, 3 managers had commented on it. By the end of the week, half the company had seen it. And that was when the board acted. The announcement came on a Monday morning. A new liaison would be assigned to our team to support communication and ensure alignment with company goals. Her name was Leora, and she was everything a liaison was supposed to be: polite, professional, relentlessly cheerful. She arrived in the basement with a smile too wide for the damp air. "I'm here to help," she said, setting her sleek laptop on one of the folding tables. "Think of me as a bridge between you and leadership." But her eyes told a different story. They scanned our charts, our sticky notes, our makeshift desks. She wasn't here to help. She was here to watch. Finola muttered something unkind under her breath. Vega ignored her completely. Dax scribbled a tiny drawing of a hawk on a scrap of paper and slid it to me. I understood. We were being hunted. Leora's presence changed the air. She didn't interfere at first. She sat quietly typing notes as if documenting progress. But I noticed her attention lingered not on our work, but on our faces. She watched who spoke most, who hesitated, who looked uneasy. One afternoon, she asked casually, "Do you ever feel disconnected down here? Maybe resentful?" Ren froze. Vega's jaw tightened. I smiled. "Resentful, no. Grateful we still get to contribute." Her eyes narrowed just for a heartbeat. Then she smiled again. "That's good to hear." I knew then that every word we spoke was being carried upstairs. That evening, I gathered the team after Leora left. "They've planted eyes among us," I said. "From now on, assume everything you say is heard. Every note, every glance, every hesitation." "Then how do we fight back?" Finola asked sharply. "Carefully," I answered. "Truth is still our weapon, but we must decide when to show it and when to hide it." Silence followed. It wasn't fear this time, but something heavier: responsibility. They understood now that this wasn't just about proving Bastion wrong. It was about survival. Over the next weeks, we worked in layers. On the surface, everything looked ordinary. Reports aligned with the company's narrative. Our charts were neat, compliant, professional. Leora nodded, satisfied, typing her endless notes. Beneath the surface, we built the archive. Hidden copies of reports, coded annotations, encrypted backups of every file, a record that couldn't be erased. The fire was still rising, but we had learned to control its glow. One night, after everyone else had gone, I sat alone in the basement. The bucket dripped steadily beside me. The sticky notes fluttered faintly in the air from the vent. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of it pressing down. Not just the company, not just the board, but the knowledge that if I miscalculated, it wouldn't be me who paid. It would be them. My people. The thought was almost unbearable. But then I remembered Vega's stubbornness, Finola's fire, Ren's courage, Dax's quiet brilliance. They weren't just following me, they were choosing to stand with me. And that meant I had no choice but to see it through. The illusion upstairs was burning brighter than ever. But fire, unchecked, consumes itself. All we had to do was survive until it did. The first real crack in the illusion came not from numbers or memos, but from anger. One of our longest-standing partners, a European robotics firm, had reached their breaking point. They had been promised a seamless integration of Bastion's new model into their systems. Instead, they got delays, bugs, and constant revisions. After 6 months of frustration, they pulled out. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Upstairs, the official line was that the partnership had run its natural course. But everyone knew better. In the cafeteria, engineers whispered openly, their voices sharp with resentment. A designer muttered, "We lost them because of him," loud enough that half the room heard. Even Deere couldn't contain the panic. He spent entire afternoons pacing the upper floors, his smile stretched thin, his voice higher than usual as he tried to reassure anyone who would listen. And Bastion? He doubled down. At the next company-wide meeting, he stood on stage, framed by spotlights, and declared the loss of the robotics firm a strategic pivot toward higher-value clients. Applause echoed weakly around the atrium, but I saw the looks on people's faces. Weariness, doubt, the illusion was cracking. In the basement, my team buzzed with energy. "This is it," Ren whispered, her eyes blazing. "People finally see him for what he is." Finola leaned forward, fists on the table. "If we push now, if we drop everything we've got." "No," I interrupted. They froze, staring at me. "Not yet," I said firmly. "The cracks are there, yes, but cracks alone don't topple walls. If we strike too soon, they'll patch over it, blame us, and make the illusion stronger." Vega frowned. "So what do? "We wait," I said. "And while we wait, we prepare. Every piece of evidence, every file, every testimony, we sharpen it until it cannot be denied." The room fell silent. They hated waiting. I hated it too, but timing was everything. Then came the second blow. A leaked email surfaced, forwarded to me anonymously. It showed Bastian pressuring a junior manager to falsify timelines to make a delayed project look like it had finished on schedule. The manager had refused, and Bastian had quietly reassigned him to a dead-end role. The email spread like wildfire. By the time Deere called an emergency meeting, half the company had seen it. In the basement, Finola practically vibrated with rage. "That's it, that's fraud, that's our proof?" But I wasn't celebrating, because something about the leak didn't feel right. It was too clean, too perfectly timed, and that was when it hit me, we weren't the only ones gathering ammunition. The following week proved me right. The board announced an independent review of Bastian's performance. On paper, it looked like accountability. In practice, it was theater. The reviewers were consultants handpicked by the same faction that had planted Bastian in the first place. They interviewed staff, collected data, nodded solemnly, and when their report came back, it glowed with praise. Bastian wasn't failing, they declared. He was navigating the challenges of transformation. The robotics firm's exit? A necessary sacrifice. The leaked email? Taken out of context. It was a masterstroke. The board had turned weakness into strength, doubt into renewed faith. Upstairs, posters appeared overnight, resilience through change. Downstairs, the air grew heavier. Ren looked like she might cry. Dax slammed his notebook shut. Vega muttered, "We're fighting ghosts." And for the first time, I felt the weight of despair pressing on me too. That night, Talia called. "You can't fight this, Sophie," she said bluntly. "They've locked it down. Every crack you find, they seal. Every truth you show, they bury. Walk away. Bring your team with you before it's too late." I closed my eyes, listening to her voice. For a moment, I wanted to say yes. But then I remembered Leora's watchful eyes in the basement, the camera in the hallway, the way they had started to monitor us. We weren't just trapped in the dark anymore. We were being cornered, and cornered people don't walk away. They fight. The trap revealed itself slowly, like fog burning away at dawn. It started with a rumor. An HR assistant whispered to Ren that the review report, the glowing one that praised Bastian, contained an appendix that hadn't been shared publicly. An appendix that mentioned us. I called in a favor, and 2 nights later, a copy of that appendix landed in my inbox. I read it once, then again, then a third time. My stomach clenched tighter with each line. The appendix painted a picture I didn't recognize, a version of my team twisted beyond recognition. Claimed we were slow to adapt, resistant to change, undermining leadership with pockets of negativity. It implied the basement wasn't exile at all, but a necessary move to contain our disruptive attitude. Every failure upstairs, every delay, every missed deadline, quietly, subtly, the blame had been redirected to us. We weren't invisible. We were scapegoats. The next morning, I gathered the team before Leora arrived. I laid the report on the table. Silence filled the room as they read. Finola's face turned crimson. "They're blaming us. We're the only reason this place still functions." Ren's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. But people know. They've seen the truth?" "No," I said quietly. "They've seen what the board wants them to see. The truth doesn't matter if the illusion is louder." Vega sat back heavily, staring at nothing. Dax scribbled furiously in his notebook, tearing the page halfway through. For the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of losing jobs, but fear of erasure, of being rewritten out of the story entirely. When Leora arrived that day, her smile was as bright as ever, but now I saw the steel behind it. She wasn't just here to monitor us. She was here to record our downfall. She lingered by Ren's desk, asking if she was finding it hard to adapt. She asked Vega if retirement had crossed his mind. She asked me, casually, if I felt my team was aligned with leadership's vision. Each question was a needle, sewing us into the narrative of resistance, dysfunction, irrelevance. And I realized the truth in Talia's warning. This wasn't just about propping up Bastian anymore. It was about preparing to burn us alive so that when the illusion collapsed, the board would have someone else to blame. That night, I sat in the basement long after everyone left. The walls felt closer than ever, the drip of the bucket louder, the hum of machinery a growl in my ears. I opened the file I had built for months, the archive of truths, numbers, testimonies. For the first time, I doubted it. What good was truth in a world that could rewrite it so easily? But then I thought of my team. Ren, still young enough to believe in fairness. Finola, hiding loyalty beneath fury. Dax, brilliant in silence. Vega, stubborn enough to stay even when he should have walked away. Kyrie knew all of them. They weren't just employees. They were lives entrusted to me. And I would not let them burn. The decision crystallized then, sharp and cold. If they were going to frame us as scapegoats, we needed to strike first. Not with whispers, not with hidden charts, but with something undeniable. Something so loud it couldn't be buried in appendices. We couldn't just reveal Bastion, we had to reveal the machine behind him. The board. The next morning, I looked at my team and spoke words I had been holding back for months. They think they've buried us in this basement. But this isn't a grave, it's a tunnel, and tunnels lead somewhere. Their eyes lit with a mix of fear and fire. Finola leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying it's time we stop collecting evidence and start using it, not to whisper, not to hint, to show the world exactly what they've done, all of it. Silence followed, heavy but electric. Then Vega nodded once. Dax slid a fresh page of code toward me. Ren whispered, finally. And I knew the fire had caught. The masks were slipping upstairs. But down here in the dark, we were ready to tear them off completely. When you know you've been marked as a scapegoat, every day feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the push. The appendix had made it clear. The board intended to blame us. Every failure, every delay, every fracture in Bastion's illusion would be laid at the basement's door. When the reckoning came, we would burn, and Bastion would walk away as the symbol of courageous innovation. But what they hadn't counted on was how fire spreads. I gathered the team late on a Friday evening, after Leora had left with her endless notes. The basement was ours again, just us and the steady drip of the bucket. I laid everything out, the files, the emails, the timelines, the testimonies, months of evidence woven into a tapestry of truth so tight it could not be unraveled. This is it, I told them. Our moment. We've been silent long enough. If we wait, they'll bury us. If we strike now, we bury them. Finola's eyes burned. About time. Ren bit her lip, nervous but resolute. How? Not through whispers, I said. Not through leaks, we take it public. Clients, partners, staff, everyone sees it at once. We don't just reveal Bastion's failures, we reveal the machine propping him up. The room went silent, heavy with the weight of it. Then Vega leaned forward, his voice steady. I've given 30 years to this company. If they want to throw me in a basement, fine, but I won't let them erase us. I'm in. One by one, the others nodded. Dax slid a new piece of code across the table. Ren whispered, let's do it. The fire had caught. We spent the weekend building. Dax designed a system that would bypass the company's filters and push our archive to every employee inbox simultaneously. Kyrie polished the language, making sure every line of data was framed clearly. Muir prepared infographics that even the board couldn't spin. Finola combed through every file for inconsistencies, sharpening the edges like a blade. I wrote the introduction. It wasn't angry. Anger can be dismissed. It wasn't bitter. Bitterness can be ignored. It was calm, patient, ruthless in its simplicity. This is the truth, I wrote. Not the version you've been fed, but the reality we've lived. You deserve to know it because truth belongs to everyone. On Monday morning, Leora arrived with her usual too-bright smile. She set her laptop on the folding table, ready to record our downfall. By then, the system was already armed. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as Dax pressed a single key. At 9:03 a.m., the basement's archive erupted across the company. Inboxes pinged, screens lit up. Charts, emails, testimonies, numbers, every lie unmasked, every illusion stripped bare. The silence that followed was louder than any applause. Upstairs, I imagined Deer's face, Bastion's stammer, the board's panic. Down here in the basement, we just waited. Because once truth is out, it doesn't need defending. The first response came within minutes. A junior designer messaged Ren, thanking her for proving what everyone suspected. An engineer sent Finola a note. Finally, someone said it. By lunch, staff across the company were openly talking about the archive in hallways and chat channels. By evening, a client forwarded me a simple message. We knew something was wrong. Thank you. The illusion machine had been pierced. But victory never comes without retaliation. The retaliation came faster than I expected. By noon, Deer stormed into the basement with 2 board members in tow. His face was crimson, sweat glistening at his temples. He slammed a printout of the archive onto the table, pages scattering across our makeshift desks. What is this? He shouted, voice cracking. Who gave you the authority to spread lies across the entire company? I stood calmly. They're not lies. Every number is documented. Every email is real. Every testimony is from your own staff. One of the board members, a gray-haired man with cold eyes, leaned forward. You've undermined leadership, Sophie. Do you realize the damage you've done? I met his gaze. The only damage is the truth being seen. If that destroys you, then maybe you were never stable to begin with. For a moment, the room trembled with silence. Deer opened his mouth to retort, but the second board member, a woman younger, sharper, spoke first. She's right, she said softly. Everyone turned to her. I've seen the reports, she continued. I've questioned the numbers. You ignored me. Now the whole company sees it too. The gray-haired man stiffened. Dear stammered. Bastian, standing in the corner for once without words, looked pale. And just like that, the illusion cracked wide open. The unraveling was swift. By the end of the week, clients were demanding explanations. Staff were openly challenging Bastian's methods in meetings. The press had caught wind of the leaked archive, and headlines whispered of fraud, mismanagement, and board infighting. Deere tried to spin it, but every attempt only tightened the noose. Bastian tried to defend himself, but his polished smile looked grotesque under the weight of facts. The board fractured. Some members clung to the illusion, but others, desperate to save themselves, began pointing fingers. Deere's name was whispered with contempt, Bastian's with ridicule. And in the middle of it all, we remained in the basement, waiting, steady, watching the storm we had unleashed. 2 weeks later, the announcement came. Bastian had resigned to pursue new opportunities. Deere was transitioning out of leadership. The board promised a renewed commitment to transparency. It was theater, yes, but it was theater we had forced them to perform. The basement exile ended not with permission, but with inevitability. One morning, movers arrived, carrying our desks and monitors back upstairs. They avoided our eyes, but their hands shook as they worked. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew who had done it. When we walked into our old space, sunlight spilling across the desks, the building felt different. People looked at us, not with pity but with respect, some even with gratitude. We had been ghosts. Now we were undeniable. That evening, as the team settled in, Ren whispered, "We made it." Vega chuckled. "Told you stubbornness pays." Finola smirked, scribbling another jagged circle around Bastian's initials in her notebook, then crossing it out with a single slash. Dax left a doodle on my desk. Not a cartoon this time, but a simple drawing of a tunnel leading into light. I held it for a long moment, then smiled. Later, alone, I stood at the window, watching the city lights blink like stars against the night. We had survived the basement. We had survived being buried, erased, rewritten. We had fought the illusion machine and lived to tell the truth. But more than that, we had proven something deeper. That no matter how powerful the illusion, no matter how loud the lies, there will always be people who remember the weight of reality. People willing to stand in the dark until the masks fall. And when they do, the truth shines brighter than any spotlight. I turned from the window, back to my team, back to the desks we had reclaimed. The plan had ended, but our story had only just begun.